She had always been quiet. Most people in the small cafe where she worked didn't know much about her, and she preferred it that way. She moved through her days with a soft smile and gentle hands, carrying trays of coffee and tea to customers, wiping tables, and arranging pastries on the counter. She never complained, even when the cafe was crowded, or when the coffee machine sputtered and hissed in ways that made everyone else groan. It was a small place with a warm smell of fresh bread and coffee that wrapped around everyone who entered. Regulars greeted her by name, and she always nodded politely. But they would rarely hear her speak more than a few sentences at a time. Despite her quietness, there was something about her that people noticed but couldn't put their finger on. Sometimes, when the cafe was quiet, she would hum soft tunes while she cleaned. She didn't think anyone was listening, but occasionally a customer would pause, curious, and then smile before returning to their coffee. Her humming wasn't loud or showy. It was like a secret song she carried with her, a melody that followed her everywhere. Few knew that she had once been a piano student. She had grown up in a house filled with music, a small, upright piano sitting in the corner of the living room. As a child, she would practice for hours, her fingers flying over the keys, her eyes focused, and her heart alive with every note. Music had been her world, a place where she felt free and confident. She loved the way her hands could tell a story, the way a single chord could make her feel so many emotions. But life had its way of changing plans. Her family had gone through hard times. Money had become scarce, and the piano lessons that once filled her days were no longer possible. She had to stop, to help at home, to work, to do what she could to make ends meet. The piano remained in the corner of the living room, gathering dust, a silent reminder of dreams she could no longer chase. She kept it locked away in her heart, believing that talent alone could not survive without opportunity. Years passed, and she learned to live without it. She moved from one job to another, finally finding a place at the small cafe where she had become part of the quiet background. The cafe wasn't a place for music or dreams, it was a place to work and to live day by day. Yet no matter how much she tried to forget her past, small moments reminded her of it. The feel of a key under her finger, the sound of a piano and a song on the radio, even the hum of a melody while washing dishes would make her heart skip a beat. She was careful not to let anyone see that side of her. People in the cafe liked her for her calm nature and her dedication. They would joke about her being shy, but it was never about talent or ambition. She liked it that way. It kept her safe. Safe from disappointment. Safe from questions she couldn't answer. Safe from the world that had once taken so much from her dreams. But life has a way of opening doors when you least expect it. One ordinary morning, a familiar face appeared at the cafe. He was a man who came often, dressed neatly, always polite, and with a warm smile. He was wealthy, everyone knew, and he had an air of authority mixed with charm. He didn't usually stop to talk, but that day, he asked her about her day and complimented the coffee. She smiled politely, not expecting more than a brief exchange, but he lingered. "I'm hosting a party next week," he said casually, "and I could use some help. Would you be interested?" She blinked, surprised. She didn't usually get invitations to anything, especially not something that sounded fancy or important. I can help," she said softly, unsure why she had agreed. He smiled, pleased. "It will be a good experience, I promise. Nothing too difficult, just serving, making sure guests are comfortable." She nodded again. The offer was simple, but it was something different from her usual routine. Maybe it would be interesting to see a different world, even for a few hours. She didn't know it then, but that small yes would be the first step toward changing everything. As the week went on, she found herself thinking about the party more often than she expected. She imagined the large house, the guests dressed in fine clothes, the laughter, the music she would hear from a distance. A tiny part of her felt nervous. She had always been good at blending into the background, at being unnoticed. The thought of standing in a house full of strangers, of being part of something so different from her ordinary life, made her stomach twist. On the morning of the party, she woke earlier than usual. She chose her outfit carefully, wanting to look neat and professional, but not flashy. She tied her hair back and checked herself in the mirror, seeing the same quiet, unassuming woman who had always been there. She carried a small bag with her, not knowing what to expect, only that it was her responsibility to do her best. When she arrived at the house, she was immediately struck by its size and elegance. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, their light reflecting in sparkling patterns on the polished floors. The walls were lined with paintings, and there were flowers everywhere, filling the air with a delicate fragrance. Guests were already arriving, dressed in clothes she had only seen in magazines. She felt out of place, a small figure among wealth and confidence. But she reminded herself that her job was simple: to help, to serve, and to stay unnoticed. Yet even in that crowd, she noticed a piano in the corner of the main hall. It was large, polished, and beautiful, a grand instrument that seemed to demand attention. Her heart fluttered at the sight of it. She didn't think anyone was watching her, but she couldn't help staring. Memories of her childhood lessons, of her hands moving across keys, of the music that had once filled her life, came rushing back. It was a bittersweet feeling, a mixture of longing and sadness. She busied herself with her tasks, serving drinks and arranging trays, keeping her mind on the work in front of her. She tried to push the piano from her thoughts, but it lingered in the corner of her vision, calling to something deep inside her. She hummed quietly under her breath as she moved from guest to guest, a melody she had not sung in years, and for a moment, she felt a tiny spark of joy that she had forgotten existed. By the time the evening had started, she was fully immersed in her role. She noticed the guests laughing and talking, some of them glancing at her politely, as if acknowledging her presence without really seeing her. She moved gracefully, careful not to stumble or make mistakes. Yet beneath the surface, there was a nervous energy she could not shake, a feeling that something was about to happen that would pull her out of the quiet life she had always known. As the night progressed, she continued to watch the piano, feeling an odd mixture of fear and excitement. She wondered if she could ever play like she used to, if her fingers still remembered the notes, if her heart still remembered the music. She shook her head slightly, telling herself it was just a dream, that she was here to serve, not to perform. And yet the thought of the piano would not leave her. Little did she know, that piano and the party, she thought, would be just another job, were about to change her life in ways she could never have imagined. A moment was coming, a single instant, that would call upon the talent she had kept hidden for so long. A talent that no one, not even herself, had realized still held the power to astonish. For now, she moved quietly through the crowd, unnoticed, humbly doing her work, but her heart carried a secret song. And somewhere deep inside, she felt the faintest hope that one day someone might hear it again. The day of the party had finally arrived. She woke up early, her hands slightly trembling with a mix of anticipation and nervousness. She had spent the night thinking about what it would be like to walk into a grand house filled with people she had never met, all of them polished and confident in a way that made her feel small. Still, there was a quiet determination inside her. This was just work, she reminded herself. She had served coffee and arranged pastries countless times before. She could do this too. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple, neat outfit. Nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention. She wanted to fit in the background, to move unnoticed among the wealthy guests. She tied her hair back, adjusted her apron, and took a deep breath. As she left her small apartment and stepped onto the street, the morning air felt crisp and full of possibilities. She carried a small bag with her, not knowing what would really happen tonight, but hoping that she would manage to do everything right. The mansion was even more impressive in the daylight than it had been in her imagination. Its walls gleamed in the morning sun, the gardens were meticulously maintained, and fountains sparkled as they caught the light. She felt a pang of awe as she approached. But quickly reminded herself that she was here to work, not to admire the beauty around her. She took a deep breath and stepped inside, immediately noticing the staff bustling about, preparing for the evening. Chefs carried trays of hors d'oeuvres, servers adjusted silverware, and housekeepers polished surfaces until they shined. She slipped into her role naturally, helping wherever she could, moving with quiet efficiency. As she carried a tray of drinks across the grand hall, she caught sight of the piano again. It was even larger than she had remembered from the last time she visited. A shining black grand piano with polished ivory keys that seemed to beckon to her. She stopped for a brief moment, her fingers brushing lightly over the edge as if drawn to it by some invisible force. The sound of it seemed to whisper memories of her childhood, of afternoons spent practicing scales, of evenings lost in music that made her heart swell with joy. She shook her head gently, forcing herself to focus on her work. This was not the time for dreaming. Guests began to arrive in the late afternoon. They moved with elegance and confidence, greeting the host warmly and chatting among themselves. She stayed in the background, carrying drinks, offering smiles, and keeping her movements graceful and unobtrusive. She noticed the way some of the guests paused to admire the mansion, their eyes wide with delight, and she felt a quiet sense of wonder herself. She had never been in a place like this before, and while she tried to remain focused on her tasks, she couldn't help but feel slightly out of place. Despite her nerves, she found a rhythm in her work. She moved from guest to guest, pouring drinks, offering small bites of food, and making sure everyone had what they needed. She listened quietly to snippets of conversation as she passed, hearing discussions about art, travel, business, and music. Occasionally, she caught a few compliments directed at her efficiency and polite manner. But she stayed humble, always keeping her focus on serving rather than being seen. As the evening progressed, she noticed the guests beginning to gather around the piano. A few people were chatting, some were laughing, and others were clearly waiting for someone to play. She assumed the host had arranged for a pianist to entertain. As she had heard mention of music being part of the evening's program, the room was buzzing with expectation, and for the first time, she felt a twinge of nervous excitement mixed with curiosity. She watched as people glanced at the piano, wondering who would sit down and bring it to life. Time passed, and the tension in the room began to rise. The hired pianist had not yet arrived. Guests whispered among themselves, a few expressions of impatience appearing on their faces. The host looked uneasy, checking his watch and offering polite reassurances to the crowd. Servers moved quickly, trying to keep everything running smoothly. But it was clear that the music, a central part of the evening, was missing. She continued her work, moving quietly and efficiently, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't help glancing at the piano repeatedly, feeling an almost magnetic pull toward it. The memories of her past, her training, and the joy she had once felt at playing came rushing back with each glance. Her fingers itched to touch the keys, to feel the familiar resistance and the comforting sound of notes ringing out. She shook her head, scolding herself for indulging in thoughts that had no place here. She was here to serve, not perform. Then it happened. A guest, noticing her glance at the piano, leaned over and said jokingly, "I bet you could play that thing, couldn't you?" There was laughter, a casual teasing, but it sent a shiver through her. She shook her head quickly, trying to hide the flush that rose in her cheeks. No, I can't," she said softly, keeping her voice low. The comment passed, and she returned to her work, but the words lingered in her mind. Could she? Would she dare? The host, noticing the growing impatience of his guests, asked aloud if anyone could fill in for the missing pianist. There was silence, a few murmurs of doubt, and then someone remembered her humming at the cafe. What about her? Someone suggested, pointing subtly in her direction. The laughter that followed was not cruel, but doubtful. She froze, her heart pounding as all eyes turned toward her. She felt herself shrinking, wishing she could disappear. "Are you serious?" she whispered, barely able to speak. The host nodded, politely but firmly, encouraging her to at least try. The room seemed to hold its breath, the anticipation building to a level she had never experienced before. She felt her stomach twist with nerves, her hands trembling at her sides. She had not played in years. What if she had forgotten everything? What if she failed in front of all these people? The thought of embarrassment made her want to run, to hide, to go back to the safety of serving drinks and wiping tables. Yet, beneath the fear, there was something else, a quiet, insistent voice that reminded her of who she was. She had once been a pianist. She had once played with skill, with feeling, with passion. The music had not left her entirely. It lived somewhere inside, waiting for a chance to return. She took a deep breath, telling herself that she could do this. That even a single piece, even just a short performance, would not ruin her. She could play. She had to try. Slowly, almost hesitantly, she made her way to the piano. The polished keys gleamed under the chandelier's light, and she could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her. Her fingers hovered above the keys, remembering the positions, the movements, the subtle gestures that had once been second nature. She sat down, her back straight, her heart racing, and took a deep breath. This was it. The moment had come. For a brief instant, silence filled the room. The hum of conversation faded as guests watched, curious and unsure. She touched the keys lightly at first, testing the instrument, feeling the familiar response beneath her fingertips. The first notes were simple, careful, almost timid, but as she continued, her confidence grew. The music began to flow naturally, carrying her away from the fear and the doubt. Into a space where only she and the piano existed, the guests began to notice. The doubt in their eyes slowly giving way to surprise. There was skill, precision, and emotion in every note. She played with feeling, with control, with the kind of mastery that only years of practice could provide. The room seemed to hold its breath, captivated by the unexpected performance of the quiet waitress who had quietly moved through their world without notice, and as she played, a change came over her. The fear, the self-doubt, the embarrassment, all of it melted away. She was no longer just the quiet woman serving drinks. She was the pianist she had once dreamed of becoming, the musician who had poured her heart into every note for years. The music spoke for her, told her story, shared her passion, and the audience felt it. The first half of the evening had begun as ordinary work, but it was quickly transforming into something extraordinary. In that moment, she realized that her life, her hidden talent, and the dreams she had locked away were not gone, they were waiting, and the world had finally asked her to show them. The room had gone quiet. She sat at the grand piano, her fingers hovering above the keys, feeling a strange mix of fear and anticipation. Guests stood around, some whispering, some staring in disbelief, and all waiting for her to play. She could feel their eyes on her like a weight pressing down, and for a moment her confidence wavered. She had not played in years. What if she failed? What if her fingers stumbled, her memory failed her, and the melody crumbled into silence? The thought made her stomach twist, and she considered standing up and walking away, hiding in the background where she had always felt safe. But as she looked at the piano, memories of her childhood came rushing back. She remembered the countless hours she had spent practicing, the long evenings when her hands moved over the keys without thinking, the way the music had always been a part of her. It was more than just notes. It was her voice, her expression, her heart. She had worked so hard once, and the skill had not disappeared, it was still inside her. Dormant but waiting. Taking a deep breath, she reminded herself that she could do this. She had played challenging pieces before, pieces that others said were too difficult. Her hands remembered the movements, her mind remembered the sequences, and her heart remembered the emotion. She could play. She had to believe in herself. A guest cleared his throat, trying to ease the tension in the room. "Well, shall we hear her then?" he said, half joking, half curious. Laughter followed, though it was uncertain, as if no one really believed she could perform the piece they expected. She swallowed hard, nodding slightly, and her fingers finally touched the keys. The first notes were hesitant, careful, almost shy, but as she continued, they began to flow more naturally. The piece she had been asked to play was notoriously difficult. It required speed, precision, emotion, and strength. Even accomplished pianists could struggle with it, and she knew that in this moment, every mistake would be visible. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to focus, letting her memory guide her fingers. She took it slow at first, easing into the rhythm, listening to the sound as it filled the room as she played. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. The notes began to come more confidently, her fingers moving with the familiar agility of years past. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the music as much as hearing it. Every chord, every scale, every pause carried meaning. She allowed herself to feel it deeply, to let the music flow through her, and suddenly, the room around her seemed to disappear. There were no guests, no whispers, no doubts, just her and the piano, just the sound she had always loved. Guests began to notice the change. The first few had assumed it would be a simple, clumsy performance, but now their expressions shifted to surprise and awe. The hesitant notes had become confident, each phrase carefully shaped, each melody line precise yet full of feeling. The whispers stopped, replaced by attentive silence. People leaned slightly forward, as if trying to absorb every sound, every nuance. Some held their breath, unsure if they were witnessing a miracle or simply someone with incredible skill. The music demanded everything from her. Her hands flew over the keys, moving in perfect coordination, executing the rapid passages that had once been second nature. Her feet pressed the pedals at exactly the right moments, lifting and sustaining the notes with delicate control. Her mind focused entirely on the structure of the piece, anticipating every shift in tempo, every dramatic pause, every crescendo and diminuendo, and through it all, her heart poured into the music, giving it warmth, emotion. In life, it was exhausting, both physically and mentally. She could feel her muscles trembling slightly from the effort, her back aching from sitting straight for so long, her fingers burning from the rapid movement. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She had been called upon to show her true talent, and she knew that if she hesitated, the moment would be lost. The audience was silent, watching, listening, and in that silence, she found strength. She pushed through the fear, through the fatigue, and let her passion guide every movement. The hardest sections came, passages that even experienced pianists approached with caution. Her hands moved faster, her mind sharper, her focus absolute. She felt a thrill as she executed the difficult arpeggios and chords perfectly, as if the years of practice she had thought were lost had been stored inside her all along. She remembered the joy she had once felt when mastering a challenging piece, and that joy fueled her now, giving her energy and courage she didn't know she still possessed. As she continued, her confidence grew. She no longer thought about the guests, the wealth, the doubt. They existed only as a backdrop to her music. Every note became a statement, every phrase a story. She allowed herself to be expressive, adding subtle flourishes, slight changes in tempo. A gentle touch here, a stronger chord there. The music was alive, and she was bringing it to life for the first time in years. The audience was captivated. Faces that had been skeptical were now filled with admiration. Eyes widened in surprise, some glistened with emotion, and a few people whispered softly to each other, unable to contain their amazement. The quiet waitress who had been part of the background had suddenly become the center of attention, not through arrogance or showmanship, but through undeniable skill and the purity of her talent. As the piece reached its climax, the room was completely silent, every ear straining to catch the sound. Her fingers moved at lightning speed, executing complex passages with precision, yet every note was clear and expressive. The music soared, filling every corner of the room, touching every listener in a way that words could not. Her heart raced, her breath came faster, but she didn't falter. She had entered a state where effort and passion became one, where every note was a reflection of herself, and she was completely in control. Finally, the last notes approached, softer, slower, more deliberate. She allowed herself a deep exhale, letting her fingers linger lightly on the final keys, feeling the vibration fade into the air. For a brief moment, there was complete silence. The music had ended, but the impact remained. The guests slowly began to clap, softly at first, then louder, more insistently. Some were on their feet, unable to remain seated. Faces shone with admiration, some with tears in their eyes. As they processed what they had just witnessed, she sat there for a moment, her hands hovering above the keys, her chest heaving, her mind struggling to comprehend the reaction. She had done it. She had played the hardest piece she had ever attempted in front of people who had doubted her, and she had succeeded. The fear, the doubt, the anxiety, they were all gone, replaced by a deep sense of accomplishment and an overwhelming wave of relief. The host approached her, smiling broadly, eyes shining with genuine admiration. "That was incredible," he said, almost breathless. I had no idea. You have an extraordinary gift. She nodded, barely able to speak, her mind still focused on the echo of the final notes. Guests surrounded her, offering compliments, shaking her hand. Some even asking to hear more, but she felt a calm sense of pride. She had stepped out of the shadows, and for the first time, she had truly been seen. In that moment, she realized something important. Talent is not just about practice or opportunity, it is about courage. It's about trusting yourself, about taking a chance even when the outcome is uncertain. She had hidden her talent for so long, thinking it was gone, thinking it didn't matter, and thinking she would never have the chance. But life had given her this moment, and she had embraced it fully. She had reminded herself that her gift was real, that her years of hard work had not been wasted, and that she could shine when the world finally asked her to. The applause continued, the guests still in awe, but she no longer paid attention to it. She had felt something deeper, something that went beyond recognition or praise. She had reconnected with herself, with her music, and with the joy that had once defined her life. That connection, that feeling of being alive through her talent, was more important than any applause could ever be. As the evening continued, she returned to her work, but the world around her had changed. The guests looked at her differently now, with respect, admiration, and curiosity. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, knowing that she had faced her fear and had triumphed. The piano, once a symbol of dreams lost, had become a bridge to her future, a reminder that her talent was still alive and powerful, and somewhere deep inside, she felt a sense of excitement she hadn't felt in years. The hardest part was behind her, but the possibilities ahead were endless. She had proven to herself that she could rise to any challenge, that her music could touch people, and that her hidden talent was more than just a memory, it was her present, and it would shape her future. When she lifted her hands from the piano at the last note, the room was filled with a silence so complete it felt almost sacred. It wasn't the quiet that followed a small performance or polite applause, it was the kind of silence that comes when everyone realizes they have just witnessed something extraordinary. For a heartbeat, no one moved, no one breathed too loudly, and she sat frozen at the piano, chest heaving, heart racing, sure of what would happen next. Then slowly the first clap came. A soft, hesitant sound from a corner of the room, almost like someone testing the reaction of the others. She glanced up, her eyes scanning the crowd, and saw the expressions beginning to change. Doubt and amusement had vanished from their faces, replaced by shock, awe, and an admiration so genuine it was impossible to ignore. More claps followed, growing louder and stronger, until the entire room erupted into applause, whistles, and cheers. People were standing now, moving closer, some with tears in their eyes, others simply frozen in awe, as if they could not fully comprehend what had just happened. She sat at the piano, stunned, her mind still trying to process what she had just achieved. She had faced her fear, taken the risk, and played the hardest piece she had ever attempted in front of people who doubted her. And she had succeeded. Her fingers still tingled from the movement, her arms ached from the intensity, and yet she felt a warmth in her chest, a kind of joy that she had not experienced in years. She realized that this was more than a performance. This was a reclaiming of herself, of her talent, and of the dreams she had once believed were gone forever. The host approached her, eyes wide, a broad smile on his face. I had no idea, he said, voice shaking slightly with excitement. That was beyond anything I expected. You are incredibly talented. Absolutely extraordinary. She smiled politely, a mixture of relief and humility, unsure how to respond. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible, but her eyes reflected her gratitude. She had never sought recognition for her talent before. She had hidden it, thinking it was safer to keep it to herself. And yet, now that it had been seen, it felt like a gift, a moment of truth that could not be taken away. Guests began to approach, offering compliments, shaking her hand, some even asking if she had ever performed publicly. She shook her head modestly, explaining quietly that she had studied piano as a child, but had stopped years ago. They couldn't believe it. To them, she was the quiet waitress, someone they had barely noticed before, and now she had played a piece that many professional pianists would hesitate to attempt. Their admiration was sincere, and she felt a warmth spread through her, a sense of connection to people she had only just met. Some guests had pulled out their phones, capturing snippets of her performance, recording the beauty of the music and the surprise of the audience. She felt a mix of embarrassment and pride at this. She had not expected to be documented, to have her talent shared beyond the room. But at the same time, she realized that the music itself was more important than any feelings of self-consciousness. The sound had reached them, touched them, and moved them. That was what mattered most. As the applause subsided slightly, the host turned to her again. "You must consider this more than just a hidden skill," he said warmly. "This is a gift, and the world deserves to see it. Have you ever thought about performing, about sharing this talent beyond a quiet cafe or a small room?" She hesitated, the thought overwhelming. She had dreamed of performing in the past, but life had closed that door, and she had accepted it. Now, standing in a room full of people who had witnessed her music, she felt that door opening once more. And the possibility was both thrilling and terrifying. She smiled softly, unsure how to respond. I never thought it would happen," she admitted. "I didn't expect anyone to see it. I've mostly just played for myself." The host nodded, understanding. "Well," he said, "perhaps it's time the world saw it too." There was a sincerity in his tone that made her feel as if he truly believed in her. For a moment, she let herself imagine a future where her music could reach beyond the walls of a small cafe, where her talent could touch more people, where her dreams could come alive once again. The rest of the evening continued, but everything had changed. People treated her differently now, not as the quiet server in the background, but as someone remarkable, someone whose presence carried unexpected depth and skill. Guests approached her to ask about her experiences, what had inspired her, and how she had managed to play so beautifully. She answered quietly, politely, but inside. Her heart swelled with a sense of pride and validation she had never known. She noticed that some of the staff exchanged looks, surprised and impressed. They had known her for months, sometimes years, and they had no idea she could play like this. It made her smile faintly, thinking about how little people really knew each other, and how easily a hidden talent could be overlooked. For so long, she had believed her music was private, meant only for herself. But now, she understood that sometimes, the right moment, the right opportunity, could bring something incredible to light. As the party began to wind down, she stepped away from the piano, feeling the lingering energy of the music still buzzing in the air. Guests continued to talk about her performance, replaying it in their minds, sharing their impressions, and praising the beauty and complexity of the piece. She moved through the room, helping clear glasses and offer small refreshments, but the atmosphere had shifted. The guests no longer saw her as invisible. They saw her as someone remarkable, someone whose talent had broken through the ordinary and left them astonished. Later, when the host approached her privately, he offered words that would stay with her long after the night ended. "You have something rare," he said. "Most people never discover what they can do, and even fewer have the courage to show it. Tonight you showed the world, even if only in this room, that you are extraordinary. Don't let it stop here." She nodded, a small smile on her lips, feeling the weight of his words. She had always doubted herself, always hidden her gift, but for the first time, she felt the possibility of a life that embraced her music rather than ignored it. After the party, as she walked home through the quiet streets, the city lights reflecting softly on the pavement, she felt a sense of calm and excitement she had never experienced before. The music she had played was no longer just a memory or a dream. It was real, alive, and capable of reaching others. She thought about her childhood piano lessons, the years of practice, the sacrifices she had made, and she realized that everything had led to this moment. The hidden talent she had believed forgotten had been waiting for the right opportunity, and now it had emerged, stronger than ever. She also understood that life was unpredictable. One ordinary day she had been serving coffee, moving quietly through the cafe, unnoticed and humble. And yet, one simple invitation to a party had changed everything. She had been given a chance, and she had embraced it, revealing a part of herself that had long been silent. It was a lesson she would not forget. Sometimes the courage to step forward, even when fear is present, can transform everything. Her mind wandered to the future as she walked home. The applause, the astonished faces, the words of admiration, all of it replayed in her thoughts. She realized that her life could be different now. The world was full of possibilities, opportunities she had never imagined, doors that had once seemed closed now wide open. She felt a quiet determination forming inside her. She would not hide her talent again. She would explore it, nurture it, allow it to grow in ways she had never dared before. By the time she reached her small apartment, she was filled with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. She placed her bag down, sat for a moment, and let herself remember the music. It's the feeling of her fingers on the keys, the expressions of the guests. It was more than just a performance. It was a turning point, a reminder that her talent was not just a part of her past, but a defining part of her present and future. That night, as she drifted into sleep, she dreamed of music, of concert halls, of audiences filled with wonder and admiration. She dreamed of her fingers moving effortlessly over the keys, creating melodies that could move hearts and change lives. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future where her music was not hidden, where her talent was recognized, and where she could finally live the dream she had carried in her heart since childhood. The quiet waitress had stepped into a different world that night, a world that recognized her skill, her passion, and her courage. She had been asked to play the hardest piece, and in doing so, she had not only amazed the guests, but also discovered something even more important, that her talent, long hidden and underestimated, could change the way the world saw her hand, the way she saw herself. The days after the party felt surreal. She returned to the cafe, carrying herself with a quiet confidence that had not been there before. The morning sunlight fell softly through the windows, dust motes dancing in the air, and the familiar smell of coffee and fresh bread greeted her. Everything seemed the same, and yet everything had changed. She moved through her work with ease, serving customers, arranging pastries, and pouring coffee. But the small world she had once been part of now felt like only a fraction of the life she could lead. Word of her performance had spread quickly. Some of the guests from the party had shared videos and stories online, and before she even realized it, people began reaching out. Messages arrived, invitations were extended, and opportunities she had never imagined began to appear. Music teachers, concert organizers, and even some patrons from the cafe approached her, asking if she would consider performing again, teaching, or recording. The attention was overwhelming at first, but she felt a quiet joy in knowing that her talent, long hidden, was finally being recognized. She received her first invitation to perform in a small concert hall. It was a local event, intimate and welcoming, but to her, it felt monumental. She spent hours preparing, practicing tirelessly, her fingers moving over the keys with a familiarity that never faded. The music flowed naturally, her heart guiding her through each piece. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to dream of a future where she could perform regularly. She knew there would be challenges, nerves, and doubts along the way. But the memory of the party the first time she had stepped into the spotlight gave her courage and belief in herself. The day of her first public performance arrived, and she felt the same mixture of nerves and excitement she had experienced at the mansion. She walked into the small hall, noting the rows of chairs, the soft lighting, and the grand piano waiting on the stage. The audience consisted of locals, music lovers, and a few friends she had invited. She adjusted her posture, took a deep breath, and sat at the piano, feeling the familiar pull of the keys beneath her fingers. The music began, delicate at first, and then full of life, filling the room with beauty, passion, and energy. People watched in awe. Some closed their eyes, letting the music envelop them, while others leaned forward, captivated by the precision and emotion in every note. She felt a connection with each listener, sensing their appreciation and understanding. For the first time, she realized that her talent could reach beyond herself, beyond her private world, and touch the lives of others. Each performance became a conversation, a story shared without words, a bridge between her heart and the hearts of those who listened. News of her talent spread even further. She was invited to perform at larger events, to collaborate with other musicians, and to share her story in interviews. The once quiet waitress who had kept her skills hidden for fear of failure was now recognized as a pianist of remarkable ability. She received letters and messages from people who had been inspired by her journey, who had been touched by the music she had shared, and who had learned from her courage to pursue what they loved. Despite the growing attention, she remained humble. She continued to work at the cafe for a while, not out of necessity, but because it had become a part of her life, a place that reminded her of who she was and how far she had come. Coworkers and regular customers treated her with admiration and curiosity, no longer seeing her as the quiet figure in the background, but as someone with talent, determination, and a story worth knowing. She smiled at them, feeling a sense of gratitude and connection that grounded her, even as her life began to change. As opportunities continued to grow, she began to travel for performances. Each new venue, each new audience brought excitement, challenge, and growth. She learned to navigate the world of music professionally, gaining confidence in her abilities and discovering aspects of her talent she had never explored before. She realized that the piano was not just an instrument, but a tool for expression, for sharing her experiences, emotions, and dreams with the world. Every note she played carried a piece of herself. Every audience she reached became part of her journey. Her life transformed in ways she had never imagined. Financial worries that had once dominated her thoughts began to fade, replaced by stability, purpose, and the ability to plan for the future. She found herself mentoring younger musicians, encouraging them to pursue their passions even when circumstances seemed difficult. She spoke to them about courage, about the importance of embracing opportunities, and about the belief in one's own abilities. She understood deeply that talent alone was not enough. It required action, risk, and the willingness to step into the unknown. In quiet moments, she would return to the cafe, sitting for a while with a cup of coffee, watching the sun filter through the windows and reflecting on her journey. She thought about the party that had changed everything. The moment she had first touched the keys in front of strangers, and the fear and excitement she had felt. It seemed almost unreal now, yet it had been the spark that ignited her transformation. She realized that her life had not just changed because of recognition or applause, but because she had dared to show the world her true self. Even when it felt terrifying, the piano remained the center of her world. She practiced daily, explored new pieces, and even began composing her own music. Each composition was personal, a reflection of her experiences, her struggles, and her triumphs. She found joy not only in performing but also in creating, in letting her emotions flow through her fingers, shaping sounds into stories. Music became both her refuge and her purpose, constant companion and a path forward. People continued to be amazed by her journey. Interviews, articles, and social media posts highlighted her story, emphasizing the courage it took to reveal her talent and the dedication required to master it. She received invitations from prestigious institutions and music schools, opportunities to perform in other cities, and even collaborations with renowned musicians. Each new experience expanded her world, bringing challenges and rewards in equal measure, and she embraced it all with gratitude and humility. Through it all, she remained grounded in the lessons she had learned. Talent is valuable, but it is courage and persistence that allow it to flourish. Opportunities may appear unexpectedly, but it is up to the individual to seize them. And most importantly, the joy of creating and sharing something that's meaningful can transform not only the performer, but also everyone who experiences it. She had lived this lesson herself, and now shared it with others, inspiring those who might still doubt their abilities, encouraging them to take that first step. Years later, she would look back on the night of the party with a mix of nostalgia and awe. That single evening, when she had been asked to play the hardest piece, had changed everything. It had revealed her talent to the world, shown her what she was capable of, and set her on a path she could never have imagined. She had grown from a quiet, unnoticed waitress into a celebrated pianist, recognized and admired for her skill, passion, and courage.